What's up, No Nation? It's the guys from Plant the Spear back with you for another episode, and we got a lot to unpack today, Michael. Is Florida State going to get left out in the cold? Do we not have a seat at the Power 2 table? Are we going to be an independent? Maybe we're going to be in the truck stop conference known as the Big 12. Who knows? Unfortunately, football season is a month away, and we're still talking about realignment. But there has been some massive realignment rumors over the past week or two, and so we feel like we really just need to unpack all of these, and then we can turn our focus on this 2024 season as we get excited for kickoff. Before we jump into that, I do want to mention that ACC football kickoff does start next week, so we will be on location in Charlotte to be able to kind of take the pulse of how things are going in the conference. You know, this is going to be an interesting one. This is the first ACC football kickoff since the legal stuff started, since we announced our intentions to leave. You know, at least we'll be working on the buddy system with Clemson. We get to kind of walk in and together. We'll probably be sitting in the bathroom, you know, in the back. They probably won't call on us for any questions, but at least we have a buddy system there. And I mean, it's primarily North Carolina, South Carolina media. So I'm sure they're going to look at us like the devil, but it is what it is. But it will be kind of, you know, it'll be interesting to get the pulse of what's going on there. Obviously, you guys have probably seen on social media that it's going to be Pat Payton, Josh Farmer, and Darius Washington joining Mike Norvell in Charlotte. So I'm excited to get to talk with those guys. It is interesting that they are bringing 3 high school signees that were all ACC performers last year after being negatively recruited for being portal reliant for so long. So I think that was a wise choice by Mike Norvell. Of course, we saw DJU did turn it down, which I think, again, displays his focus on the team because he wanted to celebrate that, you know, let the members from that 2023 ACC championship team go and represent FSU because we really didn't get a chance to celebrate that conference championship with the events that happened the next day. And I also think it speaks to the leadership qualities that he's taken since he's been in Tallahassee. Fall camp starts next week. We're going to be rolling out some preseason content, but man, we got to address these realignment rumors because it is burning up social media. So before we jump into that, Michael, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, man. I'm doing good. I'm here in the great state of Colorado. So if you need me to say or put in a word with our boy Dion, let me know.
He's probably trying to recruit you right now to transfer to Colorado.
Probably because I got a Florida State shirt on. So for sure. I mean, just so much is happening right now, as you said, with the ACC Media Days. You know, how cool of DJ to say, hey, no, the focus should be on those from that 2023 team celebrate the ACC champ. That's great leadership. And you're right. We're literally a month away from actual football, and yet we're only talking about rumors and conference realignments and the whatnots. And so, just a lot of good stuff to talk about in today's episode.
Yeah, I'm ready to get to talking about football. I promise you guys, I've been telling you the floodgates are going to open real soon after ACC Media Days. We plan on doing that. I've written probably over 5,000 words of game previews in the last week. So we're just kind of getting all that ready to roll out for you guys. In the same vein, I do want to mention that I did publish an article yesterday on the realignment rumors, just sharing some of my thoughts. It was kind of an in-depth thing, which I will be referencing throughout this episode if you catch me staring off screen while you're watching on YouTube. So I encourage you guys to go check that out. It's pretty all-encompassing with addressing some of these rumors, so I think you guys will enjoy that. Now, before we jump in, because we got a lot of ground to cover, so we're gonna really dive into this. I want to bring you a word from today's sponsor, Alumni Hall FSU. We really appreciate them sponsoring this episode and working with us throughout the past year. These guys have an awesome selection of FSU gear. Again, we just mentioned the season is a month away, so it's time to refresh that gear. It's time to get you some new FSU swag going on. So go check those guys out. If you're in or around Tallahassee, 1415 Timber Lane Road is the location. Online at alumnihall.com. They have a lot of teams to shop for. So maybe if you want to send like your Clemson friend a gift for helping us get out of the ACC, they have a Clemson site too. So go check those guys out, navigate over to the FSU page and use code SPEAR to get 10% off your order. So save some money while you're over there as well by telling them we sent you. So Michael, let's jump right into these realignment rumors. And there's been a lot of them. So we're going to kind of go one by one, talk about, let's back this up. The first thing you have to say when you talk about college football realignment as a whole is everything that you read is speculation, whether it be from Brent McMurphy, whether it be from Joe Twitter account with 200 followers, whether it be from podcast A, B, or C, that's from a conference or a team or whatever. It's all speculation. And anyone who tells you they know for sure is also speculating on that they know for sure, because nobody knows until you see a statement released from Michael Alford from Florida State University, from the whatever conference we're going to or coming from. you believe half of what you read and less of what you hear.
Thank you.
And I think that's really the thing. There's no point in really getting your blood pressure up, but this is a big enough topic that this ain't what we wanted to talk about, but I think we have to talk about it. So we're going to jump in. We're going to go one by one. We don't know what's going to happen. We're not here to tell you that Florida State, we're for sure going to this or that or the other, but we're going to talk about why it's important, what it means for Florida State.
Correct.
And our idea of the most likely outcome. So I think the first thing let's do is why this is still important, that I think Florida State is a power 2 or bust situation. I don't think, of course, there's the Big 12 option. I've heard people even talk about going independent. We're going to address all that too. I still think Florida State would not be going through all this. And you don't have to even put us on an island. You can include Clemson. Clemson is another major program with a lot of money and prestige. They wouldn't be going through the same thing if they didn't feel like they had a better option somewhere else. So I think that it is important to remember that that's probably the likely target for us. And a lot of that is because we know we're going to have to pay players coming up. That is, I've seen where coming out of SEC media days, I haven't had a chance to really dive in yet, but they've talked about this settlement, this house settlement that's going to be huge. You're going to have to devote a large portion of your athletic budget to paying players. Now, it sounds like collectives will still be kind of some sugar on top, the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae, so to speak. But you also have, keep in mind, you also have the assistants now, or not the assistants, but the analysts who can coach.
Correct.
So you are basically giving teams the opportunity to build an unlimited paid staff.
Yep.
That costs money.
Yep.
So there is always money at the root of everything. And in that, I do want to mention, keep in the back of your mind when people say, we don't want this, or we don't want that, or we're not looking at expanding, or whatever these sources are saying. I know, as much as we hate to admit it about the sport that we love, this is a business. This is a business at the end of the day, and businesses are in the business of growing. They are not here to stay stagnant. If you stay stagnant, you get fired.
That's right.
So that's why I say, when you look at all these realignment rumors, when you look outside of the Power 2 conferences, there are really 3 brands that dominate the airwaves or the TV markets or the financials of college football. And that's Florida State, that's Clemson, and that's Notre Dame. And Notre Dame has already stated that they value their independence. They're going to die on that hill of independence until they have to join a conference. So if Florida State and Clemson become available, they are the 2 most likely targets in realignment. They are the 2 biggest fish still in the sea that don't exist in the Power 2 conferences. So to say that they're unlikely to add these 2 is kind of crazy to me. I also want to say that you can't really talk about adding a team that's a current member of a conference while they're still in that conference. You just you can't do that. You're going to open yourself up for lawsuits and all kinds of criticism and all that stuff. So all of these anonymous sources, they're not going to go, anonymous or not, they're not going to go on record. Imagine if you saw the Big 12, or excuse me, the Big 10 or the SEC commissioner come out and say, we've been working with them, as soon as we help pry them away from that crap conference of the ACC, they're ours. You're never, ever, ever going to hear that. So yeah, we are going to jump into addressing all that. But that, I think, is really some of the things that you have to keep in mind going forward as we talk about this. So I'll let you share some overall thoughts, and then we'll dive right into these.
Yeah, again, like you said, everything is speculation, everything is hearsay, everything is, well, this is what I think, this is what I believe. And yeah, sure, some of these, credible reporter journalists like Brent McMurphy, they have credible sources. They have they are talking to ADs, they are talking to university presidents, right? They are talking to conference commissioners. But again, let's remember that conference commissioners, university presidents, and university ADs, they talk out of both sides of their mouths. They say one thing and then they do the other later on. And like you said, no conference, no AD wants to be anywhere. If the SEC or the Big 10 came out and said, yeah, we'd love to take Florida State, well, the ACC could actually sue for tampering, because that's tampering language, right? That they can do that. And so if you remember, and I know we'll talk about this later, but remember back when the Oklahoma and Texas were in the Big 12, they sent a cease and desist letter to the SEC because they believed that they were tampering with their biggest brands. So no conference wants to be anywhere associated with the tampering slander, the tampering accusation. So yeah, of course, right now they're going to say, we don't want Florida State. We're only interested in our 16 that we got right now. That's all we're focused on. We're not looking for realignment and all of that stuff. But here's the thing. in the words of the WWE $1 Million Man, everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man, right? And as soon as you said, business is in the business of growing. As soon as the dollar amounts are presented to those university presidents with adding Florida State and Clemson, they will be singing a different tune very quickly. And I believe, like you said, that Clemson and Florida State would not be going through this very expensive endeavor of trying to get out of the ACC if they didn't have, as we've said before, and this is our assumption, we don't know, but as we assume that they have a wink, wink, nod, nod, handshake agreement under the table for one of these Power 2 conferences.
Right. I think that's a good point that you make. And first off, I will say that I fully admit, I'm not saying that some of these reports don't have at least a little bit of credibility. It's just they're not going to go on record and say anything that's going to get them in trouble.
Correct.
And you're right. I do think that before this process ever happened, that there probably was. You can't say it on record, but that doesn't mean you can't be, sitting on at lunch with somebody like, hey, buddy, I'm not saying we're leaving the ACC, but I'm just saying if we were to leave the ACC, what you think here?
What you think?
So, those types of things can totally be agreed on. I wholeheartedly agree. And even if you don't think the conferences are business, but they are, because this is an arms race in college football. It's all about getting the almighty dollar to grow. The network partners are a business. ESPN, Fox, all these are publicly traded companies. And if they don't grow, their CEOs get fired. And we've already seen, ESPN struggling with Disney and all that stuff. We won't get into that, but those are businesses too. So if they can grow, that's what they're in the business of. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. That's why they put they put the Pac-12 on the guillotine and chop their head off. Because it's all about money and growing. So let's start with the Brett McMurphy rumor from the Action Network. That's where the article was originally published. Of course, he put it out on Twitter too, basically saying that the SEC and the Big Ten were unlikely to add Florida State if it leaves the ACC and the ACC stays intact. I think if it's a house of cards situation where it just comes crumbling down and everybody's looking for a musical chair to sit in, okay, maybe then they add you. But I think as long as the ACC stays intact, that's what they're saying. Now, these sources from around the Big Ten and the SEC say that they don't want Florida State because it doesn't make financial sense. There's no appetite to expand, which is kind of ridiculous after you literally just finished expanding.
Correct.
And they're also a disruptive partner. So we're the bad boys of the SEC or of the ACC. So it's kind of interesting there. Now that we've addressed why and where we think Florida State still is targeting to go, let's just kind of go through these one by one, starting with obviously the most important rumors of the SEC and the Big Ten, because that's where we want to be. So again, referencing that article that I have here and using some other notes that I have. So when you look at the Big Ten, and this is why I feel like Florida State is only setting their sights on the Big Ten and the SEC. So last year in 2023, the Big Ten paid out around, now, of course, they have non-full share members and then some are full share members. And this is off the old TV contract, which is going to renew soon, and it's going to go up even more from there. They paid out $60.5 million per school. The SEC came in at about $51 million. The ACC was anywhere between 43 and 46, and the Big 12 was between 43 and 48. So there is a clear line of delineation between the top two and the next two. And that's why I don't think the Big 12, because it's more of a lateral move, I don't think that's the option. I think you're going for that bigger move. Now, if you go forward into the new contracts, the Big Ten, and of course, this money is going to continuously grow because they have escalators and all these contracts.
Right.
It's looking like their new deal is going to be around $72 million plus the CFP money. And keep in mind, under the new CFP format, those two conferences get a much larger cut, $21 million per school. The ACC gets 13, the Big 12 gets 12. So you're adding in, you're already at a pretty sizable deficit there, an $8 million deficit just by not being in those conferences from the CFP money alone. So their new deal in the Big Ten is around $72 million plus the CFP money. Now, it could be worth a little bit more than that because of the Big Ten network, and the Big Ten does own part of that network. So that's not really baked into the numbers. The SEC's new deal is looking at starting at around $69 million per school. And that will be full share members for every school that's in the conference, which I'm going to touch on that in just a second because there's some interesting comments that I want to address there too from Greg Sankey. That $69 million, also gets added to the CFP money. So again, you're bumping that up to 80, $90 million. Now the SEC network is owned by ESPN, so that money is kind of already baked in. Now, here's what I want to address, because this was a pretty big comment yesterday. This made waves on social media as well. Greg Sankey said on a podcast yesterday, I believe it was, depending on when you're watching this, that the SEC, they're not going to, however he said it, they're not going to take their pie and cut the slices smaller or whatever. Basically, they're not going to take their pot of money and divide it amongst more teams, so they cut their pay. You cut your nose off in spite of your face or whatever.
Right.
Here's why I think that you should completely ignore what he's saying, and why that's a bit of a smokescreen. Because Greg Sankey also knows, and this goes for pretty much every conference, there is, and it's funny because Brett McMurphy, again, was the one that put this tweet out, and I replied to him.
Brett.
Right. I replied to him, or I replied to the report, the comment, with a screenshot from the Action Network, his own network that put this out. When the SEC signed their new media rights deal, which we know starts in 2024,
correct,
there is what's called a pro rata clause in that contract. And what that pro rata clause says is that if the SEC were to add any new members, ESPN has to pay them a full share amount for that new member. So the pie's getting bigger. The slices aren't getting smaller. And Greg knows that. So it's easy for him to say that. And the reason I think that's interesting is because you have to think of this logistically too. They're not going to go add, Florida A&M or something like that, or FAU or something like that. Right. It has to be a value add, because when you go to renegotiate your new contract, if you add someone who doesn't bring enough value to raise that limit, it's going to lower your contract value. So when I say there's the prorated clause to add any new additions, it's going to be up to the SEC and the ESPN to make sure that addition makes sense.
Correct.
And that's what brings me to why I think Florida State has a spot at the Power 2 table. Now, the prorated clause it's probably, because some of this stuff is hard to find, it's probably different for every conference, but every conference has this. The Big 12 has it. The ACC has it with the expansion of the new programs that we added. The Big 10 has it too. I don't know if it's full share members or not, because, the new SEC or excuse me, the new ACC members agreed to come in at a lower rate. We'll talk about that later. But when you look at being a value add as Florida State, so in some of the research that I did, when you look at Florida State, last year, they averaged 3.58 million viewers, which was 7th in the country in 2023. Even when we were coming off 4 really, let's just forget about it, seasons, Florida State was still top 15 in viewership. And so those numbers that they had, that 3.58 million weekly viewers, would have put them as the 3rd most watched Big 10 team and the 4th most watched SEC team. And that's including the new members. That's post-expansion. You also have to remember in that was playing ACC competition, which really drags their numbers down. Because when you look at these numbers, no other ACC program besides Florida State at 3.58 million, which was 7th, and Clemson at 1.7 million, which was 22nd. Their numbers really kind of fell off a cliff last year when they struggled. No other ACC program finished in the top 30 most viewed programs in 2023. Louisville was the next closest at 31st with 1.36 million. In 2022, NC State was the 3rd most viewed ACC team at 43rd. At 881,000 weekly viewers. That's not good compared to when you look at the ACC, or the SEC and the Big 10 numbers. Now, the one thing I want to point out, and I'll kick it back to you for some thoughts here, is when you look at what Florida State did last year against LSU, that not on the field, because we know we thumped them on the field. But just make sure to stick that in there. SEC, put that in your pipe and smoke it. But last year, FSU's versus LSU game brought in 9.17 million viewers, ranking it as the 6th most viewed game of the regular season. That was higher than the Iron Bowl, higher than LSU Alabama, higher than Alabama Texas, and just behind Washington Oregon. Even Florida State's matchup against a 5-6 Florida team crossed the 5 million viewer mark. So anytime Florida State plays a ACC team, those numbers are crazy. Now, the Florida State Clemson game drew 6.71 million viewers as a noon ACC game. So that one brought in
as a noon ACC
ACC game. So that one brought in numbers too. But when you look at the last 2 years, and this is why I'm telling you guys, this is why I think Florida State has a seat at the table. Over the past 2 seasons, Florida State has played 6 games against current SEC members. That's LSU twice, that's Florida twice, and that's Oklahoma, and then Georgia. So that's terrible. Even then, man, I will mention that the Oklahoma Bowl game was the second most watched non-playoff game. And the Orange Bowl, even knowing it was going to be a slaughter because the cheerleaders were playing.
Correct.
That was even the most watched non-playoff game at over 10 million viewers. So, but back to what I was saying, in the 6 games we played against SEC members over the past 2 years, Florida State has drawn in those games an average of 7.38 million viewers. 7.38 million viewers. Those numbers are massive. If you think any one of these these 2 power programs don't want to add that in, that's insane, because that, again, you had a lot of, and even, okay, so last point before I throw it to you, in the TV world, from all the research that I've done, the 4 million viewer mark is kind of like a benchmark where, like, okay, we're really doing things. So last year, Florida State had 5 games that broke the 4 million viewer mark. And that was tied with Ohio State and Washington for the 3rd most of 2023. So again, when Florida State plays on TV, if it's not, Slaughter and Wake Forest or, whatever, if it's a big game, Florida State brings the eyeballs to TV. So you have to just think about how much of a draw that's bringing to these 2 conferences. And just from a TV standpoint alone, and we're going to get into other reasons too, you would be insane not to add them to one of those Power 2 conferences.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and here's the thing. Listen, the Big Ten is poised to be the first American college conference that is basically emulating the National Football Conference, where they are poised to be a national conference. They have teams all in the Midwest. They have now teams in the big markets of LA and Washington and Oregon, right? Well, Oregon's not a big market, but in the West Coast market, they have UCLA and USC in the big LA market. The only part that they are they do not have is they don't have a team in the big Southeast market, right? They don't have a team there, which is huge. And Fox is you don't have to be, you could be a novice at college football, and you would know that Fox is desperate to plant a flag in the Southeastern market.
Yep.
Right. And so now they have a chance. The school that fits best for them, that will bring the eyeballs, it's not North Carolina, it's not Clemson, it's not even Virginia, it's not even Virginia Tech, it is Florida State. So that is key knowledge right there. Then in the SEC has prided itself on being a regional conference. That's why when they expanded, they only moved their Southeast region just a little bit further into Texas and Oklahoma, right? To gain, because they already had Texas A&M. So now they have Texas and they have Oklahoma. They want to be a regional conference only. And ESPN, which is the puppet master behind the SEC, does not want Fox to plant a flag in their region.
Or steal one of their biggest brands.
Which is Florida State, which, again, Jesse, you just walked through those numbers, and I'll say them again. FSU averaged 3.85 million weekly views in 2023, which was 7th in the nation. That if they were in the Big Ten, would have been 3rd in the Big Ten. If they were in the SEC, that would have been 4th. That would have been greater than the University of Florida, which is like still, hanging out skinning fish or something because they don't make bowl games. It would been one of the prime products of the network. And so the SEC is not just going to let Florida State go without a fight. So yes, for us to say that we believe FSU has some form of like a wink, wink, nod, nod, we're not basing this just on our own hopes and wishes. We're looking at the data. The data says you would be a fool. Why do you think the Big 12 has been saying we are open for business? Florida State. Yeah. Florida State, we're open for business because they want FSU. FSU is to use the analogy, FSU is the really incredible, beautiful girl showing up to prom, and every guy wants her, right? That's
Right.
what's happening right now, whether it's public or not. But because of legality, because of tampering, all like that stuff, right now, these university presidents and ADs who are anonymously saying these things are trying to make distance themselves far away from that, so they can't be speculated into tampering. And then two, Jesse, and I'll throw this back to you and get your thoughts on this, is I also think that maybe they're saying all of this because they're trying to drive down the price of eventually when Florida State will be right. They're trying to up their negotiating power with Florida State when Florida State is released from the ACC.
Yep.
Because Florida State has, once they get that clear, Florida State has all the leverage with all of this data point to be a full-fledged, full share member of these two power conferences.
Right. And just, I want to back up one thing real quick, because I know that this is realignment talk, so it's going to be more than Florida State fans in the comments. Guys, we are not here to sound arrogant. We are not here to tell you that Florida State is the biggest brand in the country, because it's not.
It's not. No.
But it is one of the biggest and the most desirable. And the numbers that we're throwing at you, again, is against ACC competition. And we just told you what they averaged 3.58 all of last year. And against the SEC teams, it was up to 7.38. So that's a huge difference. So we're not trying to sound arrogant. We're not trying to sound conceited like everybody's going to jump into the ring and fist fight over who gets Florida State. That's not the case. I know the numbers sometimes can drone on and maybe get a little, you start maybe dozing off a little bit, but I always want to back it with data. Like you said, Michael, we bring the numbers because I don't want to just get on here and say, well, Florida State's the most desirable because I feel like because I love Florida State. Well, no kidding. They're the most desirable to me because I love them.
Right.
The numbers tell us that they are. And so I think you're right, man. I think when the rumors came out about the Big 12 and us just being in talks, that was pretty much all it was. And we're going to get to the Big 12 rumors too. Look, Florida State would be stupid not to shop around. You would be dumb not to, go to the store A. And then, I'll tell you, dude, if I'm in the store, if I'm in Best Buy, first thing I'm going to do before I buy something is pull my phone out and check Amazon.
That's right.
Why would you not? You not? Because like you said, if everyone's there like, oh gosh, we got to have Florida State, then that brand value is going to continue to climb. The asking price is going to continue to climb. So if you play it down, again, you're avoiding legal trouble, first off. And then two, there may be some bidding there as well. So yeah, I think that is a valid point. And again, the numbers tell us why I think Florida State is that desirable from a TV draw alone. Because if you were to put Florida State against these better teams, these bigger brands in these two conferences, those numbers are going to continue to climb. And in case there's a UNC fan here, look, we love you. We ain't got nothing against UNC.
No,
Mac Brown's never beat us, so I'm cool with y'all. But let me knock on some wood real quick because we played them this year. But just looking at these numbers real quick, just from some TV numbers from 2015 to 2019, instead of just looking at 1 year, we're looking at a 4-year average here. Florida State came in, and Lord knows those were some rough years for us. Florida State was still 14th in the country at 2.23 million. North Carolina was down at 45th in TV viewership at 749,000. So really, when all this realignment came out, yes, North Carolina is a prestigious academic university. They're great at baseball. They're great at basketball. They're they're getting better at football, but it really kind of pantsed them a little bit. It was kind of humble check when a lot of these football TV numbers come out, because they realize they are not the primary revenue driver in the ACC.
Correct.
Florida State and Clemson, when you look at, and back to that 5 or the 4 million mark, when you look at the other ACC teams that had a game over 4 million last year, Duke had the second most in the ACC at 3. One of them involved Florida State.
Yes.
One of them involved Clemson. The other was Notre Dame. So basically the three big fish that we just talked about. Clemson had 2, Florida State and Duke. Miami had 2, Florida State and Texas A&M from the SEC. So what that tells you is that unless a game involves Florida State, Clemson, or Notre Dame in the ACC, or they're playing a non-ACC team, the numbers just are not there. So the TV draw is massive for Florida State. You cannot deny the numbers. They're here. Go to Sports Media Watch. Go to medium.com. Forget the guy's name. I'll shout him out real quick because he does great. Zach Miller on medium.com. That's where I'm getting a lot of this information from. Look, the numbers probably aren't perfect, but it's the best we can find, and that's what we're going with. So Also, let's touch on the revenue part because they said it doesn't make financial sense. When you look at Florida State, first off, the ACC has stated through these court sessions that the conference stands to lose up to $200 million in revenue if Florida State and Clemson were to leave. $200 million. That's a lot of revenue when you figure the ACC, I think, made just north of 700 last year. So looking at the USA Today data that was put out recently, and it's linked in that article if you want to check it out at plantthespirit.com. All the stuff is linked and referenced and all that stuff. So to kind of check my math here. Florida State's athletic department last year, 23 and 24, ranked 15th highest in revenue in the country at just over $161 million. That was second to Virginia, who also brought in $161 million, a little bit more than us, not a whole lot. But that would have put them 6th in the Big Ten and 9th in the SEC. And keep in mind, that's while collecting smaller payouts from the ACC. So from the numbers that I could find through Fox Sports, the Orlando Sentinel, and the Tallahassee Democrat from 2021 to 2023, over 3 years, Florida State has made approximately, because again, schools get paid different amounts here and there. And so just approximation here, Florida State has made around $44 million less in 3 years than a full member Big Ten school and around $28 million less than a full member SEC school. Now, that revenue gap is going to grow. That's also considering there was a period there where Florida State struggled with ticket sales a little bit because of the product on the field and whatnot. So, again, if you add in 20, 30 million to the payout, if you add in, Florida State has sold out 5 of 6 home games last year, and they've already sold out 5 of 7 this year. So you factor in all those things, that number is going to continue to climb. So when you look at Florida State's athletic department, it's they're one of the top 10 most viewed programs. They're one of the top 15 athletic departments, even playing in the ACC, getting less money. And so if we truly believe that conference expansion is done, and I don't know about you, Michael, but I don't. I mean, I don't think it's done, because I will say if college football conference expansion has taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected. It's for reports just like this to come out right before the news drops. And so if you don't think it's done, and we don't, then again, the numbers tell us that Notre Dame, Florida State, and Clemson are the 3 most value add brands that a non-power 2 or that one of the power 2 conferences can get that doesn't already exist in their conference. Now, I don't think we're going to see relegation anytime soon, where like maybe they boot Vandy out to bring us in if they want to stay at 16 teams or whatever, which, I mean, Greg Sankey has already said that they're not bound by a number, obviously because of the prorated clause. They know that they can add these teams. They don't have to stay at 16 teams. They can expand if they want to. And he said that they're not pressured to add, but they're going to keep an eye on what's going around them. And I think, you brought up a good point earlier where they want to stay geographically relevant, which, Missouri's not in the Southeast, but, hey, that's neither here nor there. Right. But Florida State is geographically relevant. And then the point that you made with Fox and the Big Ten, where this is the one corner of the country. And look, I mean, as much as Ohio State brings a big draw, Michigan and some of these other teams, we all know college football primarily lives in the South. That's why the SEC has become the machine that it has. So that's a massive market that they are frankly missing out on. And so, that's going to be part of it. Now,
and well, let me say this real quick, Jesse, too. This is another point that we need to hang on to the banner of why Florida State most likely probably already has in the last 23 years. So since 2000, Jesse, since 2000. Okay, there have been only 8 teams that were not in the SEC to win a national championship. Okay, only 8. So USC, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson, Florida State, Michigan. I can't remember the other ones, but that my point is the fact that in the last 20 years, there's only been a total of 14 different teams to win a national championship. In the last 23 years, total of 14 different teams. And of those 14, 8 were non-SEC teams. And of that, Florida State and Clemson were among them. Okay. So the fact of the matter is Florida State is one of the most iconic brands in this current era of college football that is winning national titles. Of course, the Big Ten and the SEC are going to want that collection of titles in their conference.
The prestige. And I mean, when you think about it, like, I get it. It's been 10 years since we won one. look, again, hey, I'm taking this to my grave. Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt. I think we win the national championship
Thank
last year.
you.
That's neither here nor there. That's speculation.
Yes.
But I'll die on that hill. But either way, man, I think you bring up a good point too, because man, let's be honest. If you're a true college football fan and you love the sport in your heart, this money talk is just frustrating. It is what it is, man. The I don't want to say a bad word, but the what they've turned the sport into. I was going to say a B word, that ization, the B-ization of this sport that is turned into over money. If the conferences still care about prestige,
right?
Again, Florida State is one of the most competitive programs. Of those 6 games that we talked about earlier against those SEC teams, Florida State is 5-1 in those games. I know Florida sucks, so that's been 2 of them there. But you still beat the SEC West champion in one of those. You still beat Oklahoma. I know it wasn't the great Oklahoma team.
Right.
Look, I understand what happened with the Georgia game. That's an extenuating circumstance. But, we beat Florida when they were the SEC East champions.
Right.
We beat Auburn, the SEC champion, for the national championship.
That's right.
You can't say that Florida State is not competitive against these teams. We have winning records against most of the teams in the Big 12 or the Big 10. We have done, I think, when I did the numbers, and I'm sorry I wasn't ready for this part of it, but this part of the conversation, but I think when Florida State is winning at least 10 games in the season over the last 10 or 20 years, we're like 11-12 and 3 or 4 against the SEC. So it's like Florida State can compete. Let's act like they're not. They beat South Carolina in that bowl.
Right.
And so they can compete on the field, they can compete in the revenue, and they can compete in the TV draw. And so those are important things to remember. And when you look at the ACC, I mean, look, here's the thing. Like, I know we hate the ACC, but before you break your pitchforks out, let me at least point this out. So the ACC paid out around 43 to 46 million last year. Now, the ACC has actually done a pretty decent job of growing their revenue. It's grown 50% over the past 5 years, and I think 200% over the last 10 to 20 years. So it has grown. You also add in these new schools, which, again, I think was kind of a terrible choice on what it is. But either way, that is going to bring in about an extra $2 million for the original 14 schools, because Cal and Stanford are taking a partial share through. It's going to take about 9 years to get a full share. SMU they're not taking any tier 1 media rights. They're basically living off CFP money, NCAA tournament money, and lower tier media rights. So it's going to grow. I think another important thing to talk about with the ACC is in 26 and 27, we know they have that look-in period. And there's 2 points I want to make on this. First off, that Raycom deal is set to expire in 26-27. So those lower tier media rights where the ACC screwed itself and its members, those are going to be able to be shopped around now. So let's just hypothetically say we don't make it out of the ACC. The revenue will increase. I mean, those could be substantial numbers when you shop up those other rights out of the Raycom deal. Now, there's also been rumored that if Florida State and Clemson leave, and maybe even one more brand, that ESPN might not pick up that option. That has been rumored in the last week as well. So if these two make it out, it probably is going to be a house of cards situation. So I don't even necessarily think it's about the ACC. It's when you think back to the numbers that I named earlier, where the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be at around 90 million. And the projected revenue with the new CFP deal and the new schools for the ACC members are going to be around 55 million. That's a massive gap, and it's only going to continue to grow.
Correct.
We also are locked into our grant of rights longer than any other conference. So even then, the Big 12 and the SEC and the Big 10 will renegotiate before we do. So we are locked into that revenue gap for longer than any other conference. So that's terrible in its own right. So I mean, no offense to the ACC, but really it's just because it's not that they haven't been growing their revenue. They just got lapped by the other brand or by the other conferences. And that's what's killer. Now, the last point I want to touch on with these Power 2 conferences is the disruptive member. And then we'll get into the Big 12 and the independent talk. All right. Hey, fine. We're the bad boys of the ACC. It is what it is. We knocking tables over and stuff like that. And so, the thing is with this, man, this is the one that I kind of had to laugh about the most, because which really I shoot down the it doesn't make sense from expansion and financial, because we just gave you the numbers. We see that it makes sense. But this one was kind of just funny because, as you mentioned, the Big 12 even sent the SEC a cease and desist at the rumor that they were going to steal their top 2 brands. You also had, and if you look in that article, I did add in 2 screenshots of articles where one of them even says the Big 10 has no interest in the Pac-12 teams of Cal, Stanford, Washington, and Oregon. They don't want to add these members. Another one said, a Pac-12 insider said that a source would be stunned if Oregon and Washington were to leave, and they may be able to go to the Big 12, but the Big 10 has no interest in adding them. Doesn't that sound kind of familiar to what we've been talking about this whole episode? Also, keep in mind that Texas A&M was promised they were going to be the only SEC member from Texas. You see how that worked out. That's probably pretty disruptive to them. They've been vocally pissed about them adding Texas. You don't think that the SEC stealing Texas and Oklahoma, the top two brands in that conference, was disruptive?
Right.
That's disruptive. And I will point out too, and I'll kick it back to you as far as being a bad boy of the conference, is they weren't made to sound like this for any other team in any other conference when they decided to leave. It was like, oh, look at Texas and Oklahoma. They're going to the SEC. This is going to be so fun. No one cared about what happened to the Big 12. But now all of a sudden we are going to be the bad boy because of what we might do to the ACC. And when they took those two brands, that was pretty damaging to that conference. So that's huge too. Yeah. Now, the other thing that I want to point out as well with this is that I don't think Florida State and Clemson would have had to go this legal route if the ACC wasn't playing hide the ball with the contracts and all their documents. So regardless of this, whether or not this gets us out of here, you've at least exposed a few things. We didn't know about that 26-27 extension option. We didn't know the depth of how inept that Raycom deal was. We didn't know a lot of the things in the ACC contracts. And because of these lawsuits, because of what the AG and the Attorney General in Florida did, now we do. Those contracts are open and in the hands of Florida State and Clemson. So now or at least Florida State, I know that much. So now we can look and at least know the deal that we're getting without having to do some Indiana Jones type of stuff and go up there and, you can't even look at things or whatever. So the legal process had to happen to at least let us know what our options were. And so I think that's important as well. But man, the talk of Florida State being a disruptive member is just kind of I have to chuckle at that, because there has been no realignment that hasn't been disruptive to another conference or disruptive to the sport. And it has never stopped anybody before. You don't think the Big East was disrupted when the ACC stole their brands?
Correct.
When, they turned into a basketball conference because we stole their top brands. You saw Maryland leave the ACC to go to the Big Ten. No one cared about that. It's Maryland, so whatever. But, still, there's a history of disruption. That's what realignment is. You could also call it college football disruption. And so I'll kick it to you about that. But, man, I had to laugh about that because there is no such thing as realignment without disruption.
Oh, again, I too had to have a chuckle. While at first I had rage and then I had chuckling. Yeah. Because it's absolutely preposterous for this anonymous source AD/university president to say that Florida State is a disruptive partner. Are you kidding me? And it drives me nuts that people forget that Oklahoma and Texas were pursuing a relationship with the SEC. Now, the difference between the two is the fact of the matter is that the Oklahoma and Texas were near the end of their grant of rights situation where they could do this. They put out silent feelers and it was all hush hush until it became boom. This is happening, right? I know the SEC, or I'm sorry, the Big 12 had inklings and rumors and stuff and issued their cease and desist letter. But really, Oklahoma and Texas were pretty quiet on that until the news broke. Well, Florida State is locked into, supposedly right now, they're in a legal battle to determine whether they're locked in. But they are currently locked into this grant of rights deal that goes to, if you play it all out, 2036. It's 2036, another 12 years locked into this thing. Now, again, as you mentioned earlier, Jesse, about there's a look-in period in 2027, which there's a lot of speculation basically saying that if, one, ESPN doesn't have to agree to re-up the deal, and two, especially if Florida State, Clemson, especially if Florida State and Clemson are gone, there's no incentive for them to re-up the deal. But they're locked into this thing, and they're recognizing they've tried behind the scenes. They've tried behind closed doors. They've tried to work with the ACC to come up with better revenue distribution models. And it took them making this public making this thing public for the ACC to even conciliate towards a performance based revenue
Yeah,
distribution model,
that's a great point.
which
Yep.
is still just it fails to compare to what the SEC and the Big Ten are bringing in per school per year with their media contract deal. So FSU had to go on the public defense of their university because they are a major brand and they're suffering. Clemson is suffering at the hands of poor leadership. Some would say, a dereliction of duty among the
Yeah.
previous leadership. And Jim Phillips is a nice guy from everything I've seen, but even he was, to use the saying, bent over backwards by the SEC and the Big Ten in the current playoff model deal, right? I mean, he's just not. The ACC has not had any great leadership over this time, where they could have years ago, before all this expansion had become this big thing, before the SEC had become this huge conference. Remember when the ACC back in the 90s, the SEC wasn't that big of a power conference. The ACC could have taken advantage and made themselves into this, but yet they chose to add schools like Boston College and
Miami,
Pitt,
who sucks on the field.
in Miami, who sucks on the field. But I get why they added Miami, because at the time they weren't
No,
the biggest brands.
I'm just taking shots.
No. Always take shots. But you know what I'm saying? And so again, this makes sense. It made sense for why Florida State had to go on the offensive. And then again, the other thing that people forget, and this drives me nuts, Jesse, is the fact that because of Florida sunshine laws, the Board of Trustees meetings are public domain. Right. They are required to show that. So I imagine if they didn't have those laws, then I guarantee you and I would not be hearing about this fight for suing and all that stuff, because it had been behind closed doors. And only if something leaked would we have known that this was happening. But because this was a public required meeting, because they had to have this meeting in the public, that's why we know all of this. So to call Florida State a disruptive partner is basically speaking out of both sides of your mouth. Because then you need to call Oklahoma and Texas a disruptive partner. You need to call the Big Ten a disruptive partner. You need to call USC and Oregon and Washington and UCLA a disruptive partner. You need to call Colorado and Utah that went to the Big 12 a disruptive partner. But no, only Florida State gets that moniker. Why?
Right. And even to that point, no one called, unless this is the only school that they asked about, which I'm sure you ask in pairs because everything's said in pairs. They didn't call Clemson a disruptive partner.
Correct.
So you didn't even call the other team that sued. And I think you make a lot of good points that I want to touch on real quick. There is, I think because Florida State's lawsuit was public, I think that's why Clemson's is getting so much press too. I mean, I'm sure someone would have found out, someone would have brought it to light, but because we already knew about Florida State's lawsuit and then Clemson filed afterwards, which they've probably been working in the background for a while, that got that additional press too. So why isn't Clemson being tabbed as a disruptive member? But I think you make a really good point, and I want to rewind to the ACC a little bit here. Look, whether we like the ACC or not, I'm gonna give them a little bit of a pass here, and then dunk on them a little bit too. I don't think anybody foresaw this college football bubble growing to where it was. I don't think anyone saw these billion-dollar contracts that are being signed right now. The sport just really skyrocketed. It is what it is. The ACC did what it had to back in the day to bring some stability to the conference.
Right.
I understand why they did that. The ACC was pretty good. And taking shots at Miami is fun and all, but realistically, when you think about it, I don't think anybody foresaw them. Boston College was a stupid addition.
Yes.
Why? No one foresaw adding Miami and Virginia Tech turning out the way that it did.
Correct.
Virginia Tech's an early success. Then they fell off. Miami's done nothing since they've been in the conference.
Correct.
Had those two schools had been on the level of Florida State and Clemson, we're probably not even having this conversation.
Correct.
Because back when they signed the original extensions, you probably would have got more money. So the ACC did some good things to provide stability to the conference, and I understand there was some of that we agreed to. So we have to admit fault in that as well.
Correct.
We also saw some of the shady dealings through the legal stuff with the Raycom deal and the John Swafford deal and all this type of stuff. So their hands are not free of blood either. So like they have a couple of different things there. So yeah, man, I think that's a really good point that you make. And so being that you talk about the leadership, let's jump to the Big 12 here, because I think when you talk about the rumors that Florida State is in talk with the Big 12, yes, again, like we mentioned, it's smart for Florida State to shop around because it's just you can only benefit from shopping around. And so the one benefit that I think you get from the Big 12 that you don't get in the ACC is good leadership. Brett Yormark, I think he's a good commissioner. He wasn't there when they added the other 4 teams that they added when Texas and Oklahoma left. He took over after that because of what happened. The other guy stepped down. He took over, but he was able to secure a media rights deal. And they basically said that the Pac-12 overasked. They couldn't come down to a number, and it dissolved the conference. They went out and got a deal. May not be the best deal, but it's not bad. And their deal runs through 2030, 2031 season. And it's projecting to be now the original projections were with the old $7 million payout from the CFP. So now they do get a smaller cut, but it is looking at about roughly $55 million, which that deal does not kick in until I believe 2027, 2026, because they're still under 24, 25 is the end of their media rights deal. So knowing that, I think you have better leadership in the Big 12. But my problem is with them knowing that they pay out a little less to roughly about the same as the ACC does. I don't see Florida State sidestepping to a different conference just because maybe it has better leadership. Now, in the vein of talking about the leadership, I trust the Big 12 leadership to turn that into a third power, probably more than I do the ACC's leadership, because they've shown a hungry appetite to expand. Like you said, hey, he said we're open for business. There's even been rumors that they're exploring private equity to try and lure Florida State and Clemson in if they were to leave the ACC. So I'm not going to shut the door on the Big 12 because who knows? They may end up making it financially worth it. And we know that's really all that matters. I just don't think it's going to be there because the Big 12, now that you've lost Texas and Oklahoma, you don't really have the big matchups. It's no offense to the Big 12 schools.
No offense.
It's a cool conference, but, UCF and a lot of these teams, Houston, and half of it's old G5 teams.
That's right.
They just don't necessarily bring the same numbers that the Big 10 and the SEC do. And I'll mention this about the Big 12 rumors is even if you could, and they had a pro rata agreement in their deal too, where they were, I don't think they got full share members, but they had to expand the payouts when they added these new members. Even if you bring in Florida State and Clemson and you renegotiate the contracts and say you bring a couple other schools with you, Louisville and Miami have been rumored too. That number was clearly not enough to keep Texas and Oklahoma from leaving and going to a conference that's going to be paying $40-50 million more. So even if you can renegotiate that contract, like Texas and Oklahoma are as big or bigger brands than Florida State and Clemson. So if they couldn't bring up the revenue enough to stay in the Big 12, now that they're gone, Florida State and Clemson probably aren't going to do the same, which is why I just don't think the Big 12 is an option. Again, I think as far as it goes now, I will mention too that when you look at the new CFP deal, there is also a look-in period in the CFP deal. I believe in 26, maybe 25 or 26. There is a look-in period in case more expansion happens. So the CFP payout numbers, they could change too. That is something that could happen. So the Big 12 could end up making more money through the playoff deal if they were to expand. I think the other thing you have to consider is regardless, like let's just say Florida State, we've seen them throw out the $572 million with the grant of rights and all that to get out of the ACC. Let's just say that the grant of rights gets taken down and you still have the $140 million exit fee. Let's say you go to court and you negotiate that down. Look, there's probably no way around Florida State's going to end up paying less than around $100 million to get out of the ACC. It is what it is. Both Texas and Oklahoma with literally 2 years left on their deal paid $50 million a piece to get out of there. They negotiated it down. It's supposed to be more than that. So you can negotiate this down. Why is Florida State going to pay $100 million to go make $55 million a year in the Big 12 when you're going to be making $55 million a year in the ACC? It just doesn't make any sense. So now you're actually making less money because you had to pay out $100 million.
Right.
So that's why I just don't think the Big 12, unless the relationship has deteriorated so bad that you just can't stay. That's the only way I see Big 12 being an option is if it is true that these two conferences go, no, we will not add you. But you can't stay here in the ACC, then the Big 12 is your option. Of course, we're going to talk about the independent option here in just a second to kind of close this out. But I think the Big 12 is worth exploring because you have a good commissioner who is willing to do what it takes. He's on record before saying that they will not stop until they are one of the power conferences. And so they are aggressive. They are hungry. And I think they will do what's possible to try and at least get in the bidding war, in the race for Florida State and Clemson if they make it out. So I just think with the exit fee and all that stuff now, again, it is worth mentioning that their media rights deal does renew before the ACC. So maybe if you do get Florida State and Clemson, you can negotiate that up. That's got to be taken into the whole consideration too. But I think as it stands, there's no point in sidestepping to the Big 12.
Right. Yeah. And here's the thing. Here's what I'll say. I'll start with, let me give the Big 12 its flowers. I mean, their conference commissioner the ACC schools would dream to have him. I mean, he's aggressive. He's forethought. He is ahead of his game. He's innovative. He is really trying. He is out there like Greg Sankey, like the Big Ten commissioner. His name is escaping me right now.
Tony Petitti or something.
Yeah, Tony Petitti. He is out there doing what those commissioners have done to make their conference one of what we're now calling the Power 2. He's out there trying to make it the Power 3. Whereas Jim Phillips in the ACC has not done those things. He is over here, great guy, but he's over here touting, all the success in academics and all the success we've had in lacrosse and all the success we've had in swimming. Like, okay, that's great and all. I don't want those athletic teams to think they're not important, but the money comes in football and you should be out there defending and fighting for your football programs, and you're not. So the Big 12 has done that. They are aggressive. They have added teams. They're trying, like you said, their media deal is up for renewal before the ACC. So that's a good incentive. And Florida State, as any business should be shopping around to try to get the best incentive for their university. Absolutely. So flowers to and kudos to the Big 12. But I will say that the Big 12 should be a break in case of emergency option. Yep. Like you said, here's why. Here's my one big point of this. Jesse, can you name the biggest brand currently in the SEC right now?
Oh, I'm sure it's either Georgia or Alabama.
Can you name the biggest brand in the Big Ten right now?
Easily Ohio State, Michigan, probably Oregon.
Okay.
USC maybe in there. There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them. Can you name the biggest brand in the ACC right now?
Florida State and then Clemson.
Can you name the biggest brand in the Big 12 right now?
I'd say Oklahoma State, and then beyond that, I probably couldn't even tell you who's in the Big 12.
Correct. And I would even argue that Oklahoma State is not the biggest brand. So the schools that are in the Big 12 right now are Baylor, BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, West Virginia. Okay. How about this? You have to go back to 1938 to find a current Big 12 member with a national title. TCU. 1938.
That's
you
crazy.
Have to go back to 1938 to see that TCU is basically because you can no longer count Oklahoma. Yes, Oklahoma and Texas were a part of the Big 12 when they won their national titles, but they're the SEC. The SEC is claiming those national titles, just like Jimbo claimed the recruit from Florida State when he went to Texas A&M, right? And so you can't claim those. So TCU is literally the biggest brand right now in the Big 12, and they won a title last in 1938. They got blown out in the national championship 2 years ago by Georgia. Now I know we did too by Georgia, but different circumstances, all like that stuff. But that's the biggest thing. Why would Florida State hitch its wagon to a conference that it would basically be a repeat of the ACC again? Now, again, like you said, if they added both Florida State and Clemson with their media deal coming up, they could add for a biggest thing. But outside of that, there is not football pedigree, deep blue blood pedigree in the Big 12, just like there isn't outside of Florida State and Clemson in the ACC. Blue bloods are living in the SEC and in the Big Ten. So yes, Florida State should look, they should shop around, make sure they're getting every price they can get for their membership. But man, this is a break glass in case of emergency only option to me.
I agree, and I will say some of these clauses that they have is for adding Power 5 teams because they just know a lot of the G5 teams don't draw the numbers, and the TV numbers show that too. I was looking it up. Oklahoma State from 15 to 19 was 19th in the country, but after that, I mean, there's not a whole lot there, and I think honestly, when you look at it, like, yeah, you feel better about some of the leadership and stuff like that in the Big 12, but I mean, realistically, the ACC has more potential if you were going to stick around. I mean, you have Clemson. Like, if Clemson leaves, you're leaving. So we know that. So let's just assume either we all stay or we probably all leave.
Right.
Or, or at least the two important brands. So if you keep Clemson, again, you have two nationally relevant brands, which is, really probably more than you get in the Big 12. Because like you said, man, no disrespect to Oklahoma State, but I mean, they're not at the level that Florida State and Clemson are. I would even argue they're not at the level Miami is.
No.
You still have Virginia Tech who man, they're on the precipice of climbing back into the national picture. They're projected to do good this year. They fixed a little bit of the issues in their athletic department. You also have Louisville who, again, they're a growing brand. And I think also too, when you look at the ACC, one thing I will give credit for the ACC, which is one of my favorite things about the conference, which there's not a long list, but we have some pretty cool cities too.
Yeah,
like you get Boston, you get Louisville, you get Miami, you get Atlanta, you get all these things. So like if Georgia Tech, they're always going to be little brother to Georgia, but they're right there in Atlanta. Like you have a lot of big TV markets in this conference. The teams just aren't bringing the numbers. So, North Carolina, Virginia's fallen on hard times, but these are brands that could be rebuilt.
Correct.
I think it's when you look at the Big 12, it's a lot of kind of like they've never really been prominent programs nationally. Where the ACC, man, that's what makes me so mad about this is there's a lot of potential. I mean, could you imagine if Louisville, Virginia Tech, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, UNC, Virginia, if all these teams were operating at peak efficiency, the ACC could be decent.
Yes.
And I think we're going to get a taste of that this year on the field because they project to have a lot of good teams. I think SMU's actually a decent ad.
Yeah.
Stanford, not so much, maybe in the Olympic sports, but I think you also have to keep in mind talking about the Olympic sports, which you just said that, the ACC likes to tout their success there. Football, obviously, we know is the revenue driver, but you don't think that the SEC hasn't made passes at Lonnie Alameda? You don't think that they're not going to come after a UNC basketball coach or whatever the case may be? And if you're $40-50 million behind, I mean, they could come and take your coaches from the non-football sports. They could spend whatever they want because they got the money to do it. So I think that is a good point. It's really important. And it's sad to see the potential wasted in the ACC, but really I think it's just become a revenue thing now. And, even what you talked about before, where the money that we bring into the ACC versus what we're getting back, because we're on an equal revenue distribution, that's disruptive to Florida State.
Yes,
that's disruptive to Clemson because we bring in the majority of the eyeballs and the money, and yet we're giving the same amount of money to Wake Forest, which, hey, Wake Forest fans, guess what? You're not the fastest growing brand in the ACC. You're not. And now that, life after Sam Hartman's looking pretty rough. So enjoy it while it lasted. But that's the thing, man, is like even the new success initiatives I've heard has been around, like you could earn up to around 10 million or so extra dollars. It's good, but it's not going to bridge the gap. You're still going to be at current estimates, $20 to $30 million behind, even if you took all of that.
Right.
So I think the last option I want to explore, so we don't run you guys too long here, is all this independent talk, because there's a lot of people that are like, you know what? I'm done with realignment. Let's just step out, bet on ourselves. I read an article this morning from a Notre Dame site. It's like Florida State should just bet on themselves and go independent. Let's just screw everybody and let's go do our own thing. I get it, man. Florida State was built as an independent.
That's right.
Before we joined the ACC, Bobby Bowden, we were independent for a good part of the dynasty, but times have changed, man. Someone said in the comment how it worked for Bobby Bowden back in the day. I'm like, man, we are 20, 30 years from that. This is an entirely different animal. And the reason, and let me first point out that we have seen recently, I believe UMass joined a conference. I think Connecticut might have joined a conference. So you're seeing more independent schools leaving independence for a conference rather than teams leaving conferences to become independent. Notre Dame, because of their national cachet, and we were talking about this, before the show, there's the religious ties. There's they are a national to worldwide brand. They're, they represent the Catholic faith and stuff like that. So they have such a massive brand name that's been around for 100 years, which is why they still get all the love in the polls and then they fizzle out. But Notre Dame is probably one of the only brands that can still stand like that. And I was doing some research on them. They just actually extended their new contract through 2029. They did it a little bit early because I think they might be a little nervous too. That there's a lot of shaky ground right now in college football. You don't know where you're going to end up. And so their current TV deal gives them about $50 million a year. That's not a whole lot, right? So they have also because we know they only do 6 games, they have half hitched their wagon to the ACC, which gives them around another $17 million because, they primarily play Big Ten teams. And the teams, like USC and UCLA that they did play in the Pac-12 are now Big Ten teams. So they need to be on par with the Big Ten. The ACC is going to pay them on average around $17 million. Last year, they made $22 million from the ACC. So they're getting around that $70 million mark. Now, they also are going to get around $12 million from the playoff distribution system as well. So they're on par. They're good right now. They don't really need to join a conference. They're good where they're at. Now, eventually, when these teams start making $100 million a year or something like that, that may be something for them to look at. Notre Dame has been top 5 and top 10 in viewership since the numbers that I could find went back to 2015. So they're a big TV draw still, whether they're good or not. Here's why I don't think the independence works for Florida State. So first off, not only did Notre Dame hitch its wagon a little bit to the ACC for revenue standpoint because they needed to boost their revenue, they also need to make sure they got a schedule.
That's right.
And people talk about the independence from way back in the day in Bobby Bowden's days. I'd have to even go back and look. They might have been playing 6-7 conference games back then. With the new expanded conferences, a lot of these, the Power 2, if not all, they're going to go to 9 conference games eventually.
Yep.
And so if you're Florida State and you have now, let's just say we make it out of the ACC and we decide to go independent. You've now pissed off the ACC. You've probably pissed off ESPN. So good luck getting them to schedule you. First off, you could probably schedule some Big 12 teams because, they're interested in growing their brand. Why not just join the Big 12 then?
Right.
And then if these other 2 conferences truly don't want you, which we just said why we don't believe that's the case, why would they put you on their schedule?
Correct.
And so I understand the TV draw of all the numbers that we just talked about. So there is some incentive there for these teams to say, hey, look, we do want to schedule the series, but they already have to schedule Notre Dame, or they don't have to, but they already are scheduling Notre Dame. So they already have that one independent that they are scheduling. And I think the 12-team playoff has changed everything because when you look at the automatic qualifier bids, when you look at the SEC and the Big Ten get more than the other conferences and all that type of stuff, we've seen in the past that scheduling these really tough out-of-conference games doesn't really pay anymore. It just doesn't, because as long as you win your conference, as long as you do well in your conference, because now when you look at the Big Ten and the SEC, they have the majority of the good programs in the country. We just said it. Outside of Florida State, Clemson, Notre Dame, maybe Oklahoma State, and a couple other brands in the Big 12, there's, even if you want to throw Miami and a couple of the ACC teams in the pot, there's not a whole lot of out there that's better than what they have in their own conference. Right. So why do you need to go schedule a Florida State when you can get in as a 9-3 SEC team, as a 9-3 Big Ten team? Why put yourself through that when it's not going to benefit you? And so if they don't want you and they don't want to schedule you, or if they say, you know what, man, there's no benefit. We play 9 conference games. We have, say, 5 or 6 of them are going to be ranked or whatever. Like, we're going to make it in. You might struggle to put together a schedule. And the article that I read was from the Notre Dame site was like, well, if BYU can put together a schedule with a bunch of Power 5 teams, yeah, man, but that was before a lot of this realignment. That was before half of the teams that they mentioned in that article went to a power conference, one of the Power 2 conferences. So if you couldn't make a good schedule, which we saw last year, and again, nobody believes this strength of schedule was the argument. You're already struggling with strength of schedule issues by being in the ACC. So now if you're an independent and you snag, Florida, you snag a Big Ten team. You snag, maybe Clemson still schedules you or something like that. What if you have to backfill with a bunch of G5 teams or Big 12 teams? Well, it doesn't help your strength of schedule. You now don't have an automatic qualifier bid, so you can never be a top 4 seed. That's something that Notre Dame's going to have to go through as well, that they weren't exactly excited about because they're not in a conference. They won't be able to have that top 4 seed. And in that same vein, I'll kick it back to you. Now, of course, this is theoretical. This does not mean this is not going to happen. This does not mean Florida State could not, put together a schedule every single year. It's just risky to jump out as an independent. And this is the same thing that I think eventually, not now, not next year, not in the probably next 2 to 3 years, but in the next 5 to 10 years or so, this is the one path I see to eventually Notre Dame having their hand forced to join a conference. Because all it would take, and let me just say this before I kick it back to you. You remember this little alliance that we were supposed to have in scheduling with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 that flopped straight on its face, that did absolutely nothing for the ACC? What if those schools say, we're not going to schedule you?
Correct.
Because what if the Big Ten stops scheduling Notre Dame in an attempt to make them join the Big Ten?
Correct.
Then they have no choice than to join. And so I think you run the risk of not being able to fill your schedule with good enough opponents. And you also have to throw this notion out there too, that what if you spurn ESPN? We talk about a lot of these shady deals that maybe happen in rooms that without microphones that aren't recorded on paper and things like that. What if ESPN tells its schools that, like, hey, you better not schedule Florida State? It's a far-fetched idea, and it may not happen because we know everyone would get a fat check for playing Florida State because we pointed out the numbers.
That's right.
I'm just saying that if you jump out as an independent, your stability is, it's gone. From year to year, you don't know what's going to happen. And so unless you were to be able to tap private equity, unless you were able to secure some kind of deal like Notre Dame has, and maybe you tie into some guarantees from the other conferences to play, like, okay, Big Ten says we'll play in 1 game a year. SEC says we'll give you 1 or 2 a year. I understand the argument for independent. I just don't think it's the best option for Florida State because of the risk you would be taking.
Yeah, I agree, man. Here's the thing, Jesse. There are about six global iconic brands in all of sports, right? You have the New York Yankees, you have the Chicago Cubs, you have the LA Dodgers, you have the LA Lakers, you have the
the Red Sox and
the Red Sox, you have the Dallas Cowboys, and then you have Notre Dame football. Okay. Now, you and I, we are deeply, passionately Florida State fans. We love our university. We love our school. We love our football team. We love our sports teams. So, yes, of course, we see things through a Florida State lens. But even we can admit that while Florida State is one of the top 10 iconic brands in college football, they are not one of the top 5 iconic brands in the world of sports, right? It's just, we recognize that. Notre Dame is. That's why Notre Dame has the ability to, that's why they have maintained their independence all these years, because they are this. There's the religious implications. There is the fact that they are a Catholic school and Catholics give to the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church, gives to the school, and donors give to the school. It's one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Like, it's worldwide. It's world known. Notre Dame is one of those. Look at the other independents. Now, I know you said that a couple of them have recently gone into other schools, but they have not thrived as independents at all, right? So there's that. Florida State is not one of those global iconic brands. They are a national iconic brand, but they are not global like Notre Dame.
Right. And and I'll just say to that point, if it's such a great option, how come none of the other big brands are taking it?
Exactly. Why isn't Alabama or Georgia just gone independent? Because they can get that, because they don't match the same iconic global brand that Notre Dame does. Now, yes, Notre Dame hasn't won a national title in God knows for how long. And the last time they were in a national title game, Manti Te'o was making up girlfriends. Like, I get all of that, right? But they are still an iconic brand. There's a reason why anytime Florida State goes to play Notre Dame at Notre Dame, we all jump on it, because it's Notre Dame, right? It's the opportunity. Number 2, like you said, the scheduling of this. There is, I've read on Twitter, and again, of course, it's all speculation, all of this. But there is a speculation that the Power Two conference could eventually force Notre Dame's hand to join a conference. Because if they both said, if the Big Ten and the SEC said, hey, we're not going to play you at all, period, and basically you're relegated to playing ACC and Big 12 teams, well, now that even hurts your positioning in the college football landscape, play on the college football playoff landscape, because are you going to be ranked high enough? We already know that based on this new agreement, like you said, Notre Dame can't even be in the top 4 because they'll never be conference championships. So they're always going to be playing at a disadvantage. Again, think about this too. Right now, college football teams play a total of 12 games in the regular season. If they have a conference championship and they make it, that's the 13th game. And then if they don't make the college football playoff, that's a 14th game if they go to the bowl game. But basically, if you are now at the bare minimum, will now have to play 3 college football playoff games to get to a national championship, right? So now, if you've had 13 games, and then you play 3 in the college, that's 16 games. If you're Notre Dame, you actually have to win 17 games in order to be a national champion, or play 17 games to win a national championship.
I will say they wouldn't have a conference championship. So,
oh, that's right. You're right. So 16 games.
Take one off. Yeah.
Take one off. Yeah. Thank you for.
And I will say I don't think conference championship games are going to go away. I think you would drop a regular season game before you would drop that, because it's a big payday for these conferences.
Exactly. And so the scheduling is already difficult enough for Notre Dame to continue in the season. Now, because they're Notre Dame, they still have the ties and all like that, working relationship. But like you said, there is talk, there is conversation out there that the Power Two could force Notre Dame to a conference. Also, Florida State, as much as it is an iconic national brand, as much as it has the viewership, if it, like you said, ticks off ESPN and Fox and all that stuff, it has no negotiating powers. What, they're going to go to Amazon for $10 million a year? They're going to go to Apple TV for $5 million a year? Like, no. Independence should not, in my opinion, Jesse, should never be an option. It should never. There is no benefit to it. Yes, Bobby Bowden built Florida State's dinery on the motto of we'll play any team, anywhere, anytime. I get it. Yes, he went on the road to Oklahoma. He went on the road to Nebraska. He went on the road to Michigan. But like you said, that was a different era of college football when money and all like that wasn't at the prime of what needed to be competed, and it was more pageantry and history and athletics and
even back then, you had to play the big games.
Correct.
Because there was not a playoff system. There was not automatic qualifiers. Right. So you needed those big games to bump you up in the rankings.
Correct.
Going on the road as an independent and beating Michigan, it meant something that back then, or beating Notre Dame or whoever it was. But we just talked about in the most recent, the 5 most important games episode, it's a perfect example. That Notre Dame game is probably the biggest game on your schedule. It's also the least important because you don't need to win it to make the playoffs. So no, you're perfectly right, man. Back in the day, those big games had to happen for your prestige. Now you don't need them.
Right. Absolutely. And so that to me is why I don't think independence should be on the table. I would speculate. I would speculate that it has not even crossed Michael Alford's or the board of trustees' mind at all.
Right. And I mean, there are, like you mentioned, there are a lot of streaming services now that have popped up and things like that. So I definitely understand where you have a multitude of options to choose from, but it doesn't mean you're going to, it's an unstable future in a time where, look, Florida State's, I mean, we're making pretty good, I mean, we're not making the Power 2 money, but we're making pretty good money. It's growing. We're still competitive on the field despite the pay gap. What we're doing as Florida State, trying to get into these 2 power conferences, are a long-term outlook on things. And that's why I think the comments from these anonymous sources, I love how they're always anonymous. These anonymous sources, it's a short-sighted outlook on a long-term game.
Correct.
And I think Florida State is looking at the long-term picture of like, yeah, we're competing now. Yeah, we're behind now, but we're still doing okay.
Yep.
We're not going to be doing okay in 10 years when we're $50 million behind.
That's right.
And to me, just an independent gives you less stability as a program. And, that's not just, and I want to at least say here too, that it's not just us who have said that about the Notre Dame thing, about how they may, my friend Eric from the Ohio podcast, who's a member of the College Huddle with us. Shout out to the College Huddle, by the way. Make sure you guys check those out over at the College Huddle. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff with them. We got over 70 plus podcasts. We just added USC yesterday, so we're still continuing to grow as we get close to the season. A lot of great guys over there. But this is something that I heard them talk about too that really kind of opened my eyes to that. Was like, man, all it takes is the Big Ten or the SEC or whoever it is saying, look, we're not going to schedule you anymore.
Yep.
And Notre Dame's going to have to join a conference, or they're going to be either playing 6 ACC teams and some group of 5s or some Big 12s. They're not going to have those marquee games. And so I think that is something worth mentioning that, yeah, man, I just think that I think Notre Dame can stand on its own 2 feet right now, but I think the days of them being an independent are numbered. I do think they're numbered. And that's why I don't think Florida State would be wise to go independent. I mean, again, there's the private equity thing. There's now you can put sponsorships on the field and the stadium and all this stuff. There's other ways to generate revenue. Of course, everybody else is going to be doing that too. So and I'll say this and we'll wrap this up. First off, don't get your blood pressure up over some rumors, because that's all they are. They are just rumors. And the other thing I'll say is, at least you can put your faith in Florida State in this. We are in the best administrative place that we've been in a long time. I trust Michael Alford. I trust President McCullough. I trust the Board of Trustees to do what's best for the university. They know all these numbers that we just spit out. They know all the facts and data. They know what they have as far as brand value, and they know what they should be getting for that.
Correct.
So they are going to do what they can that's best for the university, not what's best for the ACC, not what's best for Miami, not what's best for whatever. They're going to do what's best for Florida State. And so I trust them to navigate us through this process and to get us where Florida State needs to be based on the brand value that we bring. And so I think you just have to trust it, let it play out, and know that, look, either way, worst case scenario, we're stuck in the ACC making $55 million a year or so. You're still going to get paid. It's not like we're going to be relegated to the Sun Belt or anything like that.
Correct. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, Jesse, but if I was, if I didn't get my number 1, number 2 option, and I was told like, I got to stay in this place, this job, but they're going to pay me $55 million a year plus some addition bonuses from other revenue streams. Yeah, I might not be happy, but you know what? $55 million a year is better than $10 million a year, right?
Right. And they can still figure out ways to do that revenue. I mean, we said 55, but the performance and the enhancements, the new sponsorship, possibilities, as Florida State fans and boosters and stuff like that, you probably know ticket prices have went up and things like that. So they're going to find ways to close that revenue gap. But they're not going to be able to close a $50 million revenue gap.
Correct.
I mean,
correct.
And I'll say this, and I'll throw it back to you for some final thoughts here. Just because you make a lot of money, just because you make all this money in these conferences, doesn't mean you're going to be competitive. Look at Vanderbilt, look at Rutgers, look at Indiana, look at all these teams. Just because you make less money doesn't mean you can't be competitive. Look at Florida State, look at Clemson, look at all these other programs that have been successful in the conferences that didn't make a lot of money. So we'll be fine.
Right.
I don't see Florida State turning into some G5 school or anything like that. But again, it's the long-term outlook of 10 years down the road when we're still making $50-60 million and those other conferences are eclipsing, triple-digit millions.
That's right. Yeah,
it's going to hurt you in more places than football too. I think, and the last thing I'll say on it is, yes, football is going to be a problem. You know what I mean? Because you're going to be allowed to pay players. You're going to be allowed to build these staffs. People aren't really building the Taj Mahals. Facilities have taken a backseat to NIL anyway. We know we have a good collective. Just because these teams are making money from, and they're probably going to put in some salary caps and things like that to make sure, these two conferences can't pay, have a $50 million roster more than the other conferences, because that would just kill college football altogether. I think a lot of it where you're going to suffer is the non-football sports. And, we care about those. We care about our softball team, our baseball team. We don't really care about basketball until we figure out what's going on there. Like, we can actually cancel that and put the money into the other sports until we figure out what we're doing there. But nonetheless, but I think it's a long-term outlook that you have to worry about. And I think Florida State has done a great job, one, generating revenue outside of this. And they've also historically as a program done a wonderful job competing with less than a lot of other teams have. And so, because we're a young university, we don't have the
that's right, the alumni
ginormous
base.
booster base and alumni base like Florida or Georgia or Alabama that's been playing for 100+ years.
Right.
So they've done a good job. It's just, man, the money has changed. The game has changed. The structure in college football has changed, and you have to protect your long-term outlook. And frankly, a 50 to growing $1 million revenue gap is going to cause problems for you.
Exactly. And it would be a dereliction of duty by the university to not try to seek out a better landscape for Florida State University. And I believe, like you said, I'm the same vote that I trust this administration. I trust Director Michael Alford. I trust President McCall. I trust the Board of Trustees to do what's best for Florida State and Florida State only. That's their jobs. That's what they've been hired to do. That's what they've been voted in to do, and they will do it, as we've seen so far. And I will throw this one caveat to this as we end this episode is this one point. It's not a guarantee, but this one point was made so clear to me during the offseason that it gives me even more of a hope and a belief that Florida State will be in the Power 2. I do not think, and this is just my opinion, I do not think Mike Norvell comes back, re-ups with Florida State, if he did not fully believe that Florida State was going to be in the Power 2 conference in the near future.
Yeah.
There's no way. When you have that job, Alabama at your doorstep begging you to come be their next coach,
right,
and the SEC to follow the legend of Nick Saban and one of the most powerful programs in the history of college football, you don't turn that option down unless you believe that what you're building at Florida State is going to be able to compete among those teams. And so, again, it's not a guarantee. I'm not saying that, Mike knows, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying.
Right. And I do think that's a good point, because I'm sure when these contract negotiations happen, that probably was brought up. Like, we feel like this is where we're going to end up. And again, to back to this administration, we've kept Lonnie Alameda despite the SEC coming after them. We've kept Mike Norvell despite them, the SEC coming after them. Hopefully someone comes after Ham. No offense, Ham, you can get on out of here. We just locked Link down to keep Texas A&M away from our baseball coach. So they've done a good job. And yes, Florida State has competed on a high level for a long time with less money than some of these major programs.
Right.
I think it's just imagine what Florida State could turn into if they had SEC money, if they had Big Ten money. It would be one of the most, we just said they're one of the top 15 athletic departments in the country on ACC money. If you give them that big payout, they're going to be one of the most valuable athletic departments in the entire country. So, man, again, like you said, I don't think Mike Norvell turns down one of the most prestigious, wealthy programs in the country, in arguably the best conference in the country, to come back to an ACC program if he knows that he's going to be hamstrung by being stuck in the ACC. So, and I also don't think, like we mentioned before, I don't think Florida State and Clemson would go through all this if they didn't have an idea of where they're going to go. So I still think it's Power 2 or bust. I still think that's where Florida State ends up. But again, it's speculation until we know. But hopefully in this episode, I know we ran longer than we had planned on, but hopefully this deep dive into the realignment rumors at least quiet some of the fears inside. And I know a lot of people know what this is. They take it for face value. They know this is a bunch of crap that people are just spitting clickbait for clicks. And so hopefully the numbers that we've laid out, the scenarios that we've laid out, show you why Florida State does belong in there, why they will have a seat at the Power 2 table when push comes to shove, or at a minimum, they're going to do what's best for this university. And so with that being said, we'll go ahead and close it out here, guys. Again, go check out that article I wrote on plantthespear.com detailing a lot of this. I'm actually going to go update it as soon as we're done recording to address the comments by Greg Sankey yesterday, letting him know that his pie slices, in fact, don't get smaller when the pie gets bigger. So that's simple math. So go check that out, as well as, like I said, if you've watched this long and you're not liked and subscribed, like Jalen Ramsey said, what is you even doing?
What is you doing?
Drop a like and subscribe, a rate and review on the podcast to help us reach more Florida State fans. And because, again, guys, we're going to be at ACC, or I'll be at ACC Media Days next week, giving you guys some live coverage from there. We got the preseason content getting ready to roll out there as well. Make sure you check out the College Huddle. Make sure you check out today's sponsor, Alumni Hall FSU. Use code SPEAR to get 10% off. And I think that's about it, Michael. That was a pretty deep dive into some rumors. I think we've about squashed everything. But as you guys know, if you watch Plant the Spear, for any amount of time, you know that we always try and back everything we do with data and numbers and not speculations and all this type of stuff. We try and base everything off facts. And so hopefully we've laid that out for you well today. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. And with that being said, we will catch you guys on the next one. As always, thanks for watching, and go Noles.
Go Noles.